So, last time we were here, we technically studied Acts chapter 9 about Paul, but we're done with school now, so we are back to our study in Exodus, which of course is the Exodus. It's covering Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And now that, just to let you guys online and you guys here know, y'all might see Hannon up here a little bit because he is wheelhouse, whereas my wheelhouse is theological, revelation type stuff. His is theological in the law. So I told him, I said, any part of Leviticus you want to do, you go right ahead. He did an amazing sermon. If y'all go on the Guardian's Facebook page, I posted the sermon he did on Sunday, and it was very good. He did a very elegant Mother's Day sermon on a call to obedience and about how we are ignorant when we are children, stubborn when we're teens, over our heads when we're adults, and then when we get old we finally realize that mamas and daddies do know what they're talking about. And he drew it all back to Old Testament, all the way to the Ten Commandments. So it was very nicely done. So y'all probably going to see him up here when we get to certain subjects like that. So, but last time we were in Exodus, we were in Exodus chapter 4, where Moses was very reluctant to follow God's calling to free the Hebrews from slavery from Egypt. Objecting that first, who he is, to do such an amazing thing, he's like, I can't do that. Second, wondering how the Hebrews would even believe that God had sent him. His third objection, wondering now that he's got God's name, because God tells him, I am. And that's where we talked about how God's name is Yahweh, about how they still wouldn't believe him. And his fourth objection is that he's not good at public speaking. And then finally objecting outright that God needs to send someone else to do this. Don't send me, Moses. God showed him in chapter 4 many sense of humor, and then God made Moses' hand leprous and then changed it back to normal. So he gave him signs and wonders to do this, and of course also comforted him in telling him that his older brother Aaron would be Moses' mouthpiece for the children of Israel. We finished toward the end of that particular story of how God almost killed Moses because Moses' children were not circumcised, which of course is a sign of the covenant between the Hebrews and God. And that ended where we left off. Today we're going to pick back up in chapter 4. Emma, will you read verse 27 through 29?
And the Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses, and he went and met him in the mount of God and kissed him. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord who had sent him, and all the signs which he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel.
Brooke, will you read 30 and 31?
And Aaron spoke all these words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. Then he did the signs in the sight of the people. So the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel, and that he had looked on their afflictions, then they bowed their heads and worshipped.
So Moses then meets his brother Aaron. We find out in chapter 6 that Aaron is older. We'll read that later. We'll also learn the name of their parents, the parents of Aaron, Miriam, and Moses. Because Moses' mother was his wet nurse when he was adopted by the Egyptians, it may have been that Moses was introduced to his older brother and sister while under his mother's care, which is why this reunion isn't awkward. This isn't the first time he's meeting Aaron. This is more like a heartfelt reunion they're meeting again after many, many years, because again, Moses has been in the wilderness for 40 years. Then we see that Moses and Aaron, they talk, and Moses explains everything that happened to him when he met God on the mountain. And shocker, they both believe and they start worshiping God. So all that nervousness and anxiety was for nothing. If we learned anything from Genesis, it is to lean on God's understanding and not our own. Exodus really hits that message home into also trust God, even when it comes to having the trials and tribulations. And that ends chapter 4. In chapter 5. Miles, will you read verse 1?
Afterward, Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness."
This leads to the first showdown between Moses and Pharaoh. Aaron, of course, is with him, since Aaron is the spokesperson for Moses, so Moses doesn't have to do the talking. If Aaron is the one doing all the talking, I just imagine Moses in the background with a staff in his hand, just kind of like, yes, you will do this. So they command Moses, they command Pharaoh what God had told Moses to say, and that is to let the Hebrews go into the wilderness that they may worship the Lord. Miles, will you continue on and read 2 through 5?
And Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." So they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days, journey into the desert, and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword." Then the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor." You said 5:2?
Yep.
And Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor."
Pharaoh responds as any human king would. Why are you ordering me around? Why should I obey your Lord? I'm not letting the Israelites go. You're crazy. Moses and Aaron answer, the God of the Hebrews is who commands this. And they also give a warning that if Pharaoh does not let them go, bad stuff is going to happen. Pestilence, disease. It's going to happen to him and his kingdom. Of course, Pharaoh laughs this off. He does not see this as a threat, especially that the Hebrews, all he's saying is, well, y'all just need to get back to work. He thinks the whole thing is a ploy. He thinks Aaron and Moses have come up there to essentially distract him so the Hebrews could have a break from their work. So he's just telling them, you need to go back to work. And remember also the Pharaoh that is laughing this off. This is Tutmos III, who reigned from 1479 to 1425 BC. And let us continue on. Miss Vonetta, will you read 6 through 8?
So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their officers, saying, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And you shall lay on them the quota of bricks which they made before. You shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, Let us go and sacrifice to our God."
And continue on with me in verse 9. "Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words. And the taskmasters of the people and their officers went out and spoke to the people, saying, Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go get it yourselves. straw where you can find it, yet none of your work will be reduced. So the people scattered abroad throughout all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, fulfill your work, your daily quota, as when there was straw. Also, the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten, and they were asked, why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick both yesterday and today as before? So Pharaoh Thutmose apparently either had a sick sense of humor, or Aaron and Moses commanding him on in his throne room, on his throne, really made him steamed, because next we get the sad backlash of this confrontation. Because of Moses' threat, Pharaoh makes some changes. The workforce behind building the cities and whatnots that the Pharaoh commanded and the Egyptians wanted, it wasn't just made up of Israelite slaves. You also had a probably paid Egyptian workforce as well. This would have been like your slave masters, your engineers, your designers, your supervisors. I mean, history is pretty well established that the Egyptians were really good at building stuff. They had a lot of ingenuity, and they needed slave labor to do this, and this is where the Hebrews came in. Of course, also in this workforce, you had Hebrews who were supervisors over their people, but were still slaves. But whoever they are commanding that no longer the Egyptians would not gather the building materials for the Hebrews to build the brick. This would be like if you were working in construction, and instead of the contractors coming up and having the materials ready from like Lowe's or something like that, you had to not go to Lowe's and pick it up, but you had to go into the forest and chop down your own tree and get the lumber ready in order to build something. So it wasn't an easy task. Straw was the main ingredient needed for making brick at the time, and it was no longer being provided for them. The Hebrews were going to have to gather it themselves and not miss their quota. However, they did miss their first quota because they were all waiting for Moses and Aaron to come back, hopefully with good news that they could go into the wilderness and worship their God, and that's not what happened. The final part we see in the scripture is the Hebrew supervisors who were over a certain number of slaves were then beaten because the quota was not met. Emma, will you read 15 and 16?
Then the officers of the children of Israel came and cried unto Pharaoh, saying, wherefore dealest thou thus with thy servants? There is no straw given unto thy servants. And they say to us, make brick, and behold, thy servants are beaten, but the fault is in thine own people.
Brooke, will you read 17 through 19?
But he said, you are idle. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice the Lord. Therefore go now and work, for no straw shall be given you, yet you shall deliver the quota of bricks. And the officers of the children of Israel saw that they were in trouble after it was said, you shall not reduce any bricks from your daily quota.
The beaten Hebrew supervisors then go back to Pharaoh and ask, why is this being done? Why are we being beaten? Why are we being given extra work? All reasonable questions. You know, what's with the response all of a sudden? Pharaoh responds back to them saying, you're idle. Pharaoh rejects their complaints and equates them to just being lazy. And they need to get back to work. That's pretty bad. Miles, will you read 20 and 21?
Then as they come out from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. And they said to them, let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us.
So, real quick, back 40 years ago in our story, Moses killed an Egyptian. All right? He killed an Egyptian because an Egyptian slave master is beating a bunch of Hebrews. When Moses did that and he kills that Egyptian, the Hebrews get mad at Moses for it. Essentially saying, who put you judge over us? Well, just keep that in mind, because what's happening here is Moses and Aaron have now confronted Pharaoh, the villain, if you will, in this story. And when they go back to tell the Hebrews what has happened, the Hebrews then go to Moses and saying that God should judge him because of what he's done, because he has made us detestable in the eyes of Pharaoh. And sadly, we're going to see, as we go through Exodus and the rest of Torah, we're going to see a very bouncy relationship between Moses' leadership and the Hebrews who are to follow him. Ms. Fonetta, will you read 22 and 23?
So Moses returned to the Lord and said, Lord, why have you brought trouble on these people? Why is it you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all.
So again, there is a growing trend that we are going to see. The Hebrews complain to Moses. Moses complains to God. Because what happens next? Moses takes his failure with Pharaoh, his frustration to the Hebrews, to God, asking God, why have you done this? Why did you send me? God, you made me make Pharaoh upset, and you haven't delivered the Hebrews like you said you were going to. Again, God told Moses in chapter 3 that Pharaoh was not going to let them go. That this wasn't just going to be okay, go in, hey, let us go. Yeah, sure thing. You guys go ahead. Y'all have worked hard enough. Y'all deserve a break. Yeah, no. He said that Pharaoh's heart was going to be hardened. Moses was really having the same issues that we studied with the other patriarchs throughout Genesis, like Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, having issues trusting in God's plan. And this takes us into chapter 6. Follow me along. In verse 1, it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will let them go, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of this land. This conversation continues. God is responding now. God, like he did with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the others that we studied in Genesis, he is patient with them, he is kind, he is loving, taking care of the immediate need to calm Moses' fear and anxiety, telling him, I'm going to make Pharaoh so crazy, and I'm going to do so much stuff to him, he's going to be begging y'all to leave. Follow me along in verse 2 through 5. And God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, Lord, I was not known to them. I have also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their pilgrimage, in which they were strangers. And I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians kept in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. God elaborates on this issue, reminding Moses that God, our mighty God, is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he wasn't known to him, that he came to them, established a relationship with them, not the other way around, which is what makes Christianity so unique, is that our God takes an interest in us. And that he promised them the land of Canaan, And God reminds Moses that he is the God who doesn't forget his promises. He has heard the crying and complaints of the Hebrews. He has seen all of it, and he has a great and wonderful plan in store. Emma, will you read 6 through 9?
Wherefore say unto the children of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched out arm and with great judgments. And I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you a God. And ye shall know that I am the Lord your God, which bringeth you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you in unto the land concerning thee which I did swear to give it to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And I will give it you for an heritage. I am the Lord. And Moses spake so unto the children of Israel, but they hearkened not unto Moses for anguish of spirit and for cruel bondage.
God goes on to tell Moses what to say to the Hebrews, and it's the big three highlights. That God will deliver them, their slavery will be over, and that they will receive the covenant promise. But of course, as we can see here, they're just not hearing it. They're not going to listen. Brooke, will you read 10 and 11?
And the Lord said to Moses, Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of this country.
And Miles, will you read 12 and 13?
But Moses said to the Lord, if the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips? Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron about the Israelites, and Pharaoh king of Egypt, and he commanded them to bring the Israelites out of Egypt.
So in what did it say in yours? What kind of lips? Verse. Okay, so in some translation it says uncircumcised lips, and we're going to get to that in just a second. So this conversation between Moses and God continues with God reassuring Moses of his duty and his purpose. He will now go before Pharaoh yet again, but Moses says, if the children of Israel won't listen to me, why will Pharaoh? I imagine a very broken-hearted Moses. He's already unsure of himself, already scared to death to confront again the man that was possibly his stepbrother growing up, Pharaoh Thutmose III, and also wanting to literally go back home and be anywhere else and not have to deal with this situation. Telling God, God, I told you that they wouldn't listen to me, and now here I am. You've set me up for failure. And that's where I have to, ask you guys, has anybody ever been in this type of situation before where you knew God was telling you to do something and you just were completely unsure of anything you were doing? Like, just, I've been there. I can tell you that anyone in ministry has felt this way at some point, where you're thinking you were doing your best, maybe, or you thought you were an absolute failure, and it just drags you down to the bottom of the dirt. You just think you just can't go on anymore. For us today, when we look at Moses' story, it's a big encouragement to know that, we know the end of the story. We know what God did through Moses and the amazing plan that he had, and yet to see him so unsure of himself, because when people think of Moses, they think Moses, 10 Commandments, Yul Brynner coming down off Mount Sinai with both.
Charlton Heston.
I thought it was Yul Brynner. No, Yul Brynner was Pharaoh. Charles, yes, coming down and having it, but it's just. And then we think about that, and it's like, man, he really dealt with a lot. He was unsure of himself, probably had a lot of anxiety, and now he's like, God, why are you doing this to me? Again, we learned a lot of this with the story of Joshua at the end of Genesis. Not Joshua, Joseph. And how, look at how he was sold into slavery, and most people at that point would have been like, well, that's it, my life is over, I'm a slave now. And I said this then, and I'll say it again, you never know when you're faced with a trial and tribulation, the way we approach it, instead of thinking of it as a spiritual defeat, how quickly it can become a spiritual victory if you hang in there and lean on God. Also, Moses says here, again, in some translation it says, I am of uncircumcised lips. That is not to think that Moses was uncircumcised. I bring this up because Moses was clearly circumcised. He would have been circumcised at 8 days old, according to Hebrew traditions. And he also repeats this in verse 30 of this chapter. Moses, again, would have been circumcised at 8 days old. It's not that he's saying I'm uncircumcised, because again, in chapter 4, God almost kills Moses because Moses' 2 boys were not circumcised, because Moses had not passed down that covenant promise to his children. So if God had had so much of an issue with that, I'm sure he would not have let his chosen spokesman go without bearing the covenant promise, the physical mark of it. But what he's saying here is, again, because he's not a great talker, and because he doubts himself so much, and because Pharaoh is not listening, again, I mentioned this earlier, when Moses killed the Egyptian slave 40 years earlier, the Hebrews got mad at him for it, and now he's doubting everything that God is doing, because again, it seems like history is repeating itself. He's gone to Pharaoh. He said, let them go. He said no. More work was put on them, and now they're blaming Moses yet again. Why are you doing this to us? God should judge you. And he's saying, God, I'm of uncircumcised lips. He's saying here, the Hebrews aren't going to listen to me. Pharaoh's not going to listen to me, because I don't belong to either one of these people. He sees himself as an outsider. And again, because the idea here is people who are of the circumcision in this point in history are the Hebrews, and the people who aren't would be all the Gentiles. Now, of course, that's not the story today, but that's how he sees himself. He sees himself as not Egyptian and not Hebrew, so he's just an outsider and he doesn't belong anywhere. So when you think of it like that, it is pitiful. Poor Moses just thinks he doesn't fit in. He thinks he's just a loser. The rest of this chapter, of chapter 6, we get the lineage of Moses and Aaron. I'm not going to have you guys read all that, because it's a lot of googly-got names. However, the important thing we get from this is that Miriam and Aaron's father, his name was Amram, which means exalted nation. Verses 1 through 3.
So the Lord said to Moses, See, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother shall tell Pharaoh to send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt.
And follow me along in verse 4. But Pharaoh will not heed you, so that I may lay my hand on Egypt, and bring my armies and my people and the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt, and I will bring out the children of Israel from among them. Then Moses and Aaron did so, just as the Lord commanded them. So they did. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. The conversation that started in chapter 6 between God and Moses continues here. And we see the final bit of it. God, seeing Moses' frustration and doubt, calling himself uncircumcised, is a new low for Moses. Really feeling as an outcast to both people, God reiterates to Moses his calling. God tells Moses, I have made you like a god to Pharaoh. Now, this is not some weird, messed up doctrine or theology where we should ever place ourselves on the same level as the Almighty, because there are some messed up doctrines like that out there even today. But God is telling Moses, Pharaoh's not going to be able to stop this plan. I've given you power and authority in this situation, and you have a right to this message. Yes, your brother will be like a prophet and say these things, but the authority that Pharaoh will see comes from you, which comes from me, the Lord. And yes, Pharaoh is not going to listen to you. Why? Because I'm going to harden his heart. I'm going to close Pharaoh's minds and eyes to what I am doing to his people. Why? Because I'm going to multiply the signs and wonders. And why? Because of what the Egyptians have done to, as God says it, my people, my armies, calls the Israelites my armies, and my children. I will bring you out of Egypt with what? With judgment. I'm going to judge Israel, and those judgments are what's going to bring you out. God is bringing judgment on Egypt because of what they have done to the nation of Israel. And then this part ends in verse 6 and 7. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded. That's short and sweet, but it would seem that this pep talk from God did the trick in getting Moses fired up for round 2 with Pharaoh. Some look at this story and think about, well, it's unfair that God is being so wrathful against the Egyptians. But the main thing here is I want to point you to how God is being toward Moses, how fair and patient God is being on a personal level to Moses. The time that God is taking with him to get him motivated to do such an amazing and wonderful thing to get the Hebrews out of their enslavement. Moses took more encouraging than Abraham ever did. Plus, it's kind of hard to feel bad for the Egyptians in this story because, again, their pharaohs were absolutely brutal to the Hebrews. And this wasn't just forced labor. This was pretty much an early version of the Holocaust. I mean, of what happened during World War II. I mean, sure, he may not have been trying to eradicate them, but I'm sure that many Hebrews died in the course of being forced into this slave labor. Again, I point to the old Ten Commandments movie, and it was actually on during Easter this year, and I remember there's one scene when they're like, whatever pulley lever system they have of getting the stones up to build like pyramids and stuff like that. And there's this one little old Hebrew lady that's like stuck in between, and she's gonna get smushed. And like, I think they use Joshua and Caleb are in the movie, and they're like trying to stop everything that's happening while the Egyptians are just like beating them relentlessly. And they're like, "Hey, she's gonna get ran over by a big stone." And they're like, "One more Hebrew dead doesn't matter." Mm-hmm. So it was not an easy just, okay, get up, you work, and then go to bed. It was terrible. Any questions? Next week we will get more into chapter 7 and chapter 8, getting actually into the 10 plagues. So yay, fun stuff. All right. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions about the study of Exodus or any of the content we've covered tonight, you can feel free to comment in the video down below. And for you people watching on YouTube, you can always comment down below. I love answering questions. And if you'd like to reach us personally, you can always email us at guardianschristministry@gmail.com. God bless you guys. I love that we are on a new schedule, so we'll be live every Thursday at 7 for you people watching on Facebook. God bless and have a wonderful week.